When you don't know how a recruit's really doing until week 10, that's a problem. TrackWired's field training management software replaces old school paperwork with a clean, automated system. Streamlined reporting, knowledge comprehension, and crystal clear performance trends, all handled in one secure place. TrackWire gives you real time insight into their field training process so supervisors get real time visibility. FTOs save hours and recruits stay on track. If you want to tighten up your FTO program, start by going to trackwire.com. That's tracwire.com. From interviews to jail calls, Ditto Transcripts delivers fast, confidential, and court-ready transcription for law enforcement agencies. Ditto is Sarges compliant and is already working with agencies all over the U.S., including the Washington State Patrol and the National Park Service Investigations Unit. Get started now at dittotranscripts.com. That's dittotranscripts.com. The views and opinions expressed by the host and guests of this show do not represent their employing agency, department, or organization. All information should be regarded as anecdotal, contextual, and educational, and should not be misinterpreted as legal or medical advice. Welcome to Blue Grit Radio, the podcast that explores making better cops for a better community. I'm your host, Eric Tung. I've been an active police officer since 2007. We will dive into the aspects of police culture, health and wellness, leadership, and mindset. You'll hear from experts not only from policing, but all industries as they relate to being our best with purpose, passion, and positivity. Join me as we share stories, lessons, and advice so we can all be better for ourselves, our teams, our families, and our communities. All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode. Today we're going to talk about a very critical, but sometimes not super sexy part of police work, and that is police report writing. And so whether you are new and you are coming into the job, these will be very pertinent for your own development. There's a lot you can practice before you even become a cop. That's something that I have worked with people on before in coaching, which was recognizing that writing skills might not have been that great, especially in school. But there's so much you can do in practicing narrating your day-to-day activities, something like your commute, or even watching body cam or watching your favorite show that's not police related, and then writing back a narrative form, maybe even taking notes through that. And so there's a lot of practical tips and advice that you can implement alongside those things. But at the same time, there's a lot of tips that I'm going to present here that are very relevant to active cops, especially when you recognize that you might be soon to be or you are a field training officer. This helps you distill down some of the main things that you need to look for in the work that you're reviewing, as well as obviously supervisors. And so much of this is so well outlined by an article I found some time ago that got republished, but it's by Lieutenant Ben Smith. So shout out to Lieutenant Smith. It is 7 Deadly Sins of Police Report Writing, and this is featured in Police 1. So he breaks it down to these 7 key elements that I'm going to just breeze through, but I'm also going to discuss a little bit more of what we can take away from our different vantage points and even from my own anecdotal experience. So with that, number 1, factual errors or omissions. Yeah, we want to reduce that. He does take some time to recognize and highlight that we need to be very accurate. You don't want to lie. That's absolutely unacceptable. It should be a no-brainer, but unfortunately, we follow the news and we follow trends, and there are cops that put in things that are not true. And generally, they are not cops anymore, especially when it's intentional. There's every type of mistake, and we're going to go through the importance of accuracy. Yeah, we're human. You can have typos. You can mistype things. Sometimes that might be the wrong name, where if you read it back a couple times, you might have caught it. Or if your sergeant read it through more thoroughly, he or she may have caught it. But ultimately, when we have a lot of work to do and we're stressed and we're tired and we're sleep deprived and we have a whole pile of reports to review, these things happen. And so it's not to say that we're going to be perfect, but to mitigate all these things is obviously ideal. Beyond just the factual error, anyone might hear, yeah, of course we want facts in the report. Where this becomes a problem is in court specifically. A lot of cases, as you know, don't go to court. They might get reviewed and they might get dismissed, or if you didn't have the accurate information, someone that's a decision maker along the line may just decide that this is a case that is going to get pled down or looped in. It doesn't have the importance that perhaps you intended. And so that's where accuracy is so important. An example I will share is innocuous, right? But you just don't realize what cases are going to go. And of course, the ones that you spend so much time on a lot of times don't go unless they're a super significant crime, a person's crime, things of that nature, which a lot of people will take to trial because the implications and consequences are quite high for the suspects. However, in my example, it was a misdemeanor case, and I wrote like a misgender. I was talking about a male, and I said he. And then in the next chunk, I wrote she, and contextually, with my knowledge of the report and contextually for the reader, I want to say like 98 out of 100 people would have recognized that I still meant he, although I added in an S because I was in a hurry or something. But the defense attorney actually pointed that out and said, Officer Tung, could you read the second paragraph on your second page? Read those 3 first sentences. And I read, talking about the male suspect, and then I read, because I wrote, she. And after I finished reading it, the defense attorney basically said, okay, so who is she that you're referring to? And I said, I believe that is a typo, and I believe that I was intending to reference to Mr. Blank, previously referenced as he. And so the question continues of, well, why do you think you put she? Well, I'm not quite sure. At this time, I believe it was a typo. Maybe I just mistyped it and didn't catch it when I reviewed it. And then the question continued to be about whether it was a mistake. And I admitted, yes, I believe I did make a mistake there. And then the response was, well, do you believe that there could be other mistakes in your report? To which I, to the best of my abilities, based on a lot of training and tips I've gotten, which is not to get riled up or not to let it show to the jury, is to maintain a cool professional candor and demeanor and saying, yes, I fully recognize that there could be other mistakes in this report. And I don't remember how much this continued on for, but the point was made where the defense, and sometimes that is an absolute strategy to try to discredit you as the officer and or get you riled up so you don't continue to be professional and thus discredit you, the officer. The point was made. And so any way that you can curb that by just reviewing more and, as reviewers, trainers, and supervisors, try to do that as well, right? Not just look at the bare bones probable cause, which is a common thing that we will also get to. All right, number 2 is insufficient legal justification. And when I think about the FTO episode that we had, if you missed it, just scroll back through the titles, FTO panel, and Officer Davin Huang did a great job outlining how legal authority is like the basis of everything you do, right? So you really have to know your legal authority and then articulate it. You should articulate it to the person you're talking to, like if you're stopping or detaining someone, but you should be absolutely prepared to articulate it to yourself in the moment and then on paper and or to your supervisor or other cops that are involved. And so we think about that, you're building your case, you're building every incident upon a foundation, which is your legal authority. And so if you're not properly detailing that, an outside reader is not going to see it, then that's a good way to get your case tossed or open yourself up for liability or just have, a negative outcome for your case, which is the whole goal here, right? We have the whole goal being to not have that. It's to put in all this work, all this time into these incidents. We don't have ultimate control of the situation, aka stoicism, but we have to recognize the amount of control we do have or the influence we can put forward towards these constructive means. Number 3, incomplete or missing elements of the crime. All right, so you think back to your early days when you're reading the laws, the specific, revised codes, if it were, and there are elements, right? Sometimes it's A, B, or C, or it's A, B, and C, also D. These elements need to be satisfied to have probable cause for the crime of X, first degree. And if this happens or these set of circumstances happen, then it's a second degree, right? But if you recognize what you're arresting someone for, you should be able to articulate pretty cleanly how these items line up with that. Some people have taught me early on, after you detail everything that you saw, everything that you observed everything that you heard and you determine probable cause. A lot of times it is helpful to outline that with based on the following circumstances, I determine probable cause, right? The subject had this on his person. He made these statements post Miranda. The witness said this. When I arrived, he was in this spot, where the reader could recognize like all those factors are satisfied in the prongs. And so that's going to be definitely agency or culture or region dependent how you lay that all out, by your agency or how you're trained. Hopefully your prosecutors, local or county, have involved themselves in those conversations so that ultimately you do have the best work product that's going to go forward and go through. But that is a common one too for not just new cops, but cops that have been around the block a few times, right? Complacency, when we think about it, a lot of times it comes on with officer safety conversations where you've been doing the job for so long that you cut corners. Complacency happens in a lot of respects, certainly paperwork being one of them. I know plenty of cop, and I have been one where, this misdemeanor charge, okay, easy day, like not a big deal, not super involved. And so you start to try to work efficiently, and efficiency is good, but then it does reach a tipping point where it's too little. And you basically say, I came, I saw, I conquered, but then you leave a really vague, non-detailed report. And I will also say, this is probably a good time to say, don't rely on your tools, aka your body cam, aka your photos, because sometimes things happen where the body cam's not available. It might not be admissible, or the body cam or photos years down the line, data transfers, things like that, the cloud, whatever, technological things that I can't clearly explain, but I'm aware of a time where the prosecutors went to go look at some digital evidence and said, hey, it's not there. And then the officer had to go look for it. Sometimes they might have stored it somewhere else or mislabeled it. And sometimes it cannot be found. And so if you short the details because you say, hey, see photo, but you don't actually describe the condition or the placement of these things, you were fully relying on a photo that may or may not be there, then that's unfortunate, right? And that can really contribute to this like missing or incomplete element of the crime or circumstances that you're looking at. Number 4, by Lieutenant Smith, that he presents as conclusory statements unsupported by facts. So an example was the subject was drunk. The subject appeared agitated. Examples being where you are essentially drawing a conclusion that can sound like an opinion. Okay, so the subject was drunk. Okay, do we know that? Much better and specific and objective to say, I perceive the subject may be drunk based on her staggering gait and how she had trouble maintaining her balance and how she was slurring her speech. And I observed the odor of intoxicants emanating from her person and or from her breath, which seemed to increase as I got closer to her and as she continued to speak more. So illustrating the details would lead a lot of readers to say, okay, that person's drunk. But you don't know that she's drunk. And I think that's the point that we're making here. Okay, so the subject was nervous. Do you actually know the subject's nervous? Does anyone actually know the subject's nervous outside of the subject? What you could say is paint the picture with details, right? As I continued to interview Mr. Johnson, he appeared to breathe more heavily and look around at the ground. He started looking down at his feet and started to look behind him. And I thought maybe he was target glancing and potentially looking for an avenue of escape, at which time my partner and I decided to detain him because we didn't want him to run, something like that, right? So the reader or the listener may perceive on their own that this person seems like they're getting nervous and antsy and trying to do something, but it's really your illustration of what you saw and what that person is doing that paints the picture. Number 5 is telling the future. So this is a big one, and I see this as like it's very well intended, but it can create issues of credibility. So the example that he puts here in the article is, I will go get video footage on Monday. All right, so what happens if on Monday you call out sick? Well, now that you're a liar, so you could very well say, I have not obtained video footage. I will make my best effort to go on my next shift. Okay, that's a better option for sure because it doesn't have the specificity of Monday. You may also say, I left a voicemail and send an email to the witness requesting they upload the video via this link. Maybe even write that you set a reminder on your next working day to check in. But don't commit to something that you don't know if you can or can't do. In many places in the article, Lieutenant Smith points out that this could absolutely be attacked from the opposite side, right? So defense saying, "Oh, you said you're going to do it Monday. Did you do it Monday?" And you either say no, which is not good, or you don't remember, which is also not good. And the defense attorney asking you if you have any record of going to get it, in which case you would say no, again, not good. And then potentially, I don't know, which is, again, also not good. So simply, as he states, take the actions you intend and document them in follow up, right? So document what you did and perhaps outline some things and then and revisit it, right? Open up another report or add to that report the update. And detectives do this very frequently. Number 6 is the passive voice. So this just goes with grammar, but it makes it way, way easier for the reader to understand what happened. And so the example being the room was cleared by officers. So the converse would be Officer James and I cleared the room, right? You start with the subject and then you say what happened, right? So another example, reason why I want to highlight that is sometimes I feel, and I've heard this for years, where officers don't want to name drop, quote unquote, name drop other officers because they kind of want to keep them out of the report. Maybe they're just helping out as a backing officer, but no need to have you write this whole report and drag you into potential court subpoena. This is a goofy logic because it's all documented. We all know who went to the call, and ultimately that person may remember something of value. And ultimately, something might happen with you or the person writing the primary report where it could be helpful to have other people involved. Also, you can figure it out anyway. So why go through it and remove the ability to just clearly know who was there with you in the room? Prosecutors might want to know, body cam, CAD, like it's all going to say. So just say what you did. And if someone did something where it's probably better that they actually write a report or a supplement, like they took evidence and like they picked up this thing and then transferred it, well, let's just do it cleanly, right? So we don't open ourselves up to the slings and arrows that are going to tear our investigation apart later. It's very simple to write these little supplemental reports just saying, yeah, I came and I helped clear this room, and then I saw this bloody knife, I put on a glove, I picked up the knife, I put it in an envelope, and then I handed it to Officer Blank because they were handling a lot of other evidence, right? So again, defer to your local procedures, protocols, but we went from passive voice to just talking about detail, but they're very much relevant to the conversation. Number 7, the final one presented, is unexplained police jargon. Okay, so a lot of times people say that our reports are for us in our own memory, and that is true. However, recognize that reports are often read by all kinds of people. And so if you want it to make sense, or maybe let me put it this way, if your report can be decently understood by a lay person, then what does that hurt? So acronyms, different codes, things like that. It also can prime you to use plain speak if you write in some version of plain speak or you explain it in your reports when you go to explain it later. If we're just doing cop talk reports and I'm later asked about it in a deposition or an interview, a defense interview prior to going to court or an actual trial in front of a jury, if I'm reading my report prior to going on the stand or even on the stand, it can shift me into plain speak mode a little bit easier if I actually detail that. Right, so acronyms, things like that. I like how in this section he also provides some not this blank, but this blank. And the first example he does is not this, quote, I assisted him to the ground, which is a huge pet peeve, I think, of a lot of cop supervisors and trainers. I assisted him to the ground or I escorted him to the ground. It's become a meme even. But what does it mean? And so he presents this option instead. I grabbed the subject by the right arm with both hands and pulled him to the ground. Okay, so you're literally writing what you did. It's not some I did this, figure whatever arm lock twist move that I learned in academy and, counter levered this and then went into this, position. Literally just say what you did. And that's advice received from a lot of different sources. but it makes it very plain that you can detail it and a layperson can understand what you did, right? So if you wanted to add more detail, and sometimes people do literally assist people to the ground, right? So it could be I grabbed the person's right arm with both hands just above the elbow and started pulling him downward, saying to him he was under arrest. I did not feel any tension. He said, okay, okay. And so my partner, Officer Blank, and I slowly lowered him to the grassy ground. And then we cuffed him, double locked, check for fit, right? So in that, you could even hear that, no, I did lower the person to the ground. Like I didn't throw him on the ground. But again, you're saying what you did. And now the reader understands that. And hopefully your body cam and other sources help verify that, right? So we're not over relying on technology. We're not over relying on something that may or may not be there. It does corroborate what we're saying, but ultimately we are presenting the information plainly so it can be best understood. And so that was the crash course of 7 things. Again, these are very helpful tips. I wish things were presented this way more frequently when I was a new cop, but I know that for a lot of people that listen in, they're going through police testing. Like this is the type of thing that puts you in the seat, in a way, and helps you think about things, and how you want to remember details and how you want to practice articulating them and detailing them. But also these tips are very relevant for just being understood, right? Like so much of effective communication is presenting your ideas clearly and being understood so that you can be effective. Right? So whether it is a case report or an email or a text message, relaying your ideas in clean, concise ways so the other person can understand them is all good stuff, right? You are regarded better, you're more credible, people might think you're more intelligent, but also the goal is that you're on the same sheet of music. You're speaking the same language, literally. And any gaps in that, from being vague or poor grammar and not proofreading and having typos, will contribute towards the opposite. And so, again, whether you're new, whether you're seasoned, you realize that, like me and everyone else, sometimes your reports, you only find out because they get kicked back by a different supervisor, or you do have to go to trial and you're like, oh my gosh, how did I write so little on this thing? It's just a little bit of a call up, right? A little bit of a check-in to say, yeah, I don't want to cut corners. I want my work to be effective, certainly for trainers and supervisors as well. So I hope that was helpful for all of you. I know if you listened that far, there's something that you got from it. Again, huge shout out to Lieutenant Ben Smith from Fairfax out on the East Coast for presenting this article. And he also has a link in the Police One article in like the footnote bio where he has written police report writing, right? So he's just written a guide to help with that. All right. Thanks so much for listening in. Again, share with all your peoples. I appreciate you. Stay safe. Take care. Stay gritty. Thank you for tuning into another episode of Blue Grit Radio. As always, support this community by subscribing, giving us a 5-star review, and following, liking, and sharing posts on Blue Grit Wellness on Instagram. You can reach me there or email me at bluegritwellness@gmail.com. Be well and stay gritty.